So, you want to learn Live2D? So do I. So I'd like to preface this with, I am still a beginner and by no means a professional. However, before you click off this video, with learning from a beginner, we can learn together as well. I know how hard it is to watch all these videos and how a lot of them mostly be advanced knowledge that you may not have an understanding of Live2D anyways, so I'd like to fill that gap as well as make the information more easily digestible. So let's get into the video. Most of my items I make to sell on Etsy, and the link will be below if you want to check it out, but I use my iPad, so you can use Photoshop Clip Studio, but this is what I use, so it's what we're going to be using today. So let's go. Before going into Live2D, we have to make sure we have our art layers correctly set up for Live2D and to export it as a PSD file. Again, I use Procreate, so that's what I'll be showing today, but you can use any program that allows for you to export as a PSD file, because it's the only file type Live2D will accept. If you already know this information, feel free to skip ahead to the Live2D section, but again, I'm trying to cover this for someone that may not have any knowledge on this. For setting your canvas size, I would suggest looking up recommended dimensions for whatever you're wanting to create. For example, emotes, hype jars, overlays, etc. And then make sure you have the color type set to RGB and not CMYK, because RGB is for digital and CMYK is used for print. Once your canvas is made, you can now start working on your drawing, but your number one thing to focus on is organizing your layers and placing them in groups. I cannot stress how important this is and will save you time later. A general rule of thumb is if you don't know if something should have its own layer, it's better to keep it on its own layer because you can always merge it later on. And something to keep in mind is most software does have a cap on how many layers you can have. So now that you have your art drawn, make sure they're separated in groups based off of how you want to animate it. For instance, I have this separated as the head, arms, and body. Next, hide every group but one and then export as a PNG. Do the same thing for each group, so you should have the same number of PNGs saved as groups that you have. Now that we have our PNG saved, we're going to create a new canvas that's the same dimensions as the previous canvas we were working in. In the new canvas, we're now just going to go one by one and insert all of the PNGs we just saved and add them to the canvas. Once all of the PNGs are added in and in the correct layer order, you can now export as a PSD file. And I typically just email these to myself to easily access them from my PC. And that is all for the preparation portion of this for getting your artwork prepared for Live2D. So now we can get into Live2D section of this tutorial. Okay, now that we're in Live2D, I want to first go over the user interface and kind of going over how some things work. Again, this is not covering everything. Live2D can be really advanced, and so I'm going to first give you all examples of ones that I have worked on and the ways that I've used these specific tools. So I'm just going to be simplifying the tools that you can use so you can just get started with learning Live2D. Okay, so at the top we have the first thing that you're going to see is a blank screen, or it may have something already which you can clear out, just delete all. You want to be on model, and then there's animation, but we're going to get into that a little bit. I've never used form animation, so I'm not going to cover that. We're mainly going to go over model and animation. So I'm going to drag and drop the PSD file, and you can see we have the layers that we created. So we have the head, jar, which that I'm actually going to remove from the animation, which is so cool about Live2D because if it's in the model, you can choose to change it or make adjustments to it or have it removed. So I like keeping the things that I'm going to remove later in just so I can get an idea of how everything will be sized. And then the background would make sure you remove it, or else when you go to export, the background will still show and you want it to be a transparent image. Now that we have these, you can either drag and it will highlight, or you can select one layer and then shift to highlight everything. Okay, so at the top here, you'll see auto, which is what we're going to select. You want all the layers selected, and then you're going to select auto. So that automatically generates a mesh. You can see here it's standard, little to heavy. So basically what this does is you can see it's going to add these tiny dots on there so that those are what allow you to manipulate the image that you're wanting to do. So you can see it's going to pull around on each one, and you can actually go in here and edit the mesh and add in some. Or actually, if you hold Alt, it will allow you to get rid of it. And if you've worked in Adobe or something, it's pretty similar to some of the programs in Adobe as well that allow you to do that with a pen tool. So now that you have the mesh created, you're going to look down here where it says parameter. That's where you're going to be able to start adding movement to create the model for animation. It's going to be blank. You can edit parameter, and then that's going to allow you to change the name it whatever you like. So this would be head. Good. So right now I have everything selected. I want to make sure I don't have that, because whatever you have selected is what's going to be able to be manipulated on that specific parameter. So I have the head selected, but then if I have the jar and the head selected, once I add these keyforms, you want to have the specific image that you want selected, or else you can accidentally move an image on that specific keyform, which would be the things that we're about to add. That's not what you're wanting to do, but I will explain that later. Right now we have the head selected. We added in the title head. Then you're going to select down here. There's different options. So there's add two keyforms. That's going to let you have one side, another on here, on the various axis basically. Or you can make it 3, which is going to allow more movement. You can also customize it through this one. I honestly don't go in here unless I have to when I've worked on more advanced project, but again, we aren't covering that today. We're just going to do a beginner steps. So when adding in a new parameter, you want to make sure you only have the layer selected that you want to actually make an adjustment to that parameter. So for instance, I just want the head selected for this because I'm going to add movement to the head. If I go to one keyform, so right here is the center, so I want it to remain at the center here. So I'm going to go to the next keyform, and it's going to be on the left. So I want it to turn to the left, so I can just literally turn the head this way. And so you can see now that when I move it, it's going to move to that side. So this is marking it, and basically you're telling it when it's here, it's going to be moved to this side. So now we're going to do the same thing on the right side. So we're going to drag the keyform to the right, and then we're going to rotate the item that we want to manipulate. Let's put it here, and then now you can see the movement. And it's kind of cool because with Live2D, it automatically will fill the gap of the movement of it, whereas using another animation program you have to add a tween. It kind of fills in the gap of the movement for you based off of the parameters that you have set. You're basically already setting it, showing how you want the object to move. After that, if you don't need the rest of these, you can go through and select these and just delete. So then once I export the model, the only thing that I will have in the animation area would be just this animation. Okay, so now we're going to go over the items at the top here, which I'm only going to really cover these two because I feel like it is an additional beginner tool that's really helpful. So we have the warp deformer. So we're going to add this. You want to have it dragged in. So now you can see that the head is added to the curved surface, which is the warp deformer. When you want to make adjustments to this, you're going to make sure to have actual curved surface selected so that when you make adjustments to it, you can actually see it's going to pull and move this, which is really good for your wanting to add side-to-side movement to something and kind of give the appearance of something looking another way. It can also be good like if you're making like a jiggly butt and you can add some movement to that. You can see if I have this selected, it's only going to show the mesh that is originally created, which is why you want the adjustment on here so that it actually makes those changes to the curved surface. Okay, so then another way you can use the warp deformer is to create a parent, which is so cool, and I'm going to show you another project later, but first I'm going to show you how to get that set up. So you can see here there's different options: add as a parent of selected objects, as a child of selected objects, which is grayed out because we would need the parent created first, so that's why it's grayed out. If you see that option grayed out and you're trying to create a child of that parent, you need the parent first. Or set parent manually. We already have it selected, so we want to set it as the parent. So you have it set as the parent. So now basically it is the main object that you can attach other items to. So think of it as like the body that you're going to attach limbs to or something. Now you can add deformers to it. So the rotation deformers. Since we created the parent, we can add in attachment parts that are going to connect to that parent. Let me first show you how to do this, and I'll show you an example that will better explain it and have a better understanding of how it works. And if you go to the Live2D website, they have an example that you can play around with the file to figure out how everything works. And that's how I had to learn it, which is why I'm making this so you don't have to go through those steps. But I would still recommend giving it a look because it is still helpful to kind of get an idea of what you're working with. Okay, so again, you can create the parent using a rotation deformer or the mesh, but since I want to be able to move the entire thing as a parent, which is why I use the mesh deformer. So now we're going to add a rotation deformer. You want to make sure to have the curved surface selected, or else it's not going to allow you to select as a child of selected object. So since we're adding in a deformer, we're going to select that as a child of the selected object, create. You can see we have the rotation here. You're going to drag in the object and you can see it places it into the rotation. So you can see this is now selected. So when I grab this rotation, it's going to allow you to move the object. So you can see it kind of looks funny. But since we have it parented, we can move the objects together, but you can also still move this on its own, which can be really helpful for different projects. So now I'm going to show you the project that I use this specific method for. Okay, so looking at the project that I have here as an example, I wanted to create a little axolotl. So I wanted it to look like it was floating and then its legs were moving with it. So you can see that here. So we have the axolotl here. It can move on its own, but then separately it has the arms and legs that are shown here in the rotation. So the body is the parent and the legs are the children to the parent, so that everything can move together, but then also it can move separately on its own. So this is another simple tool that can be really helpful for using Live2D and just creating simple things, but can feel really complicated when you're first learning Live2D. I'm going to show you a technique that I use with creating these bubbles that I like adding to a lot of my animations. I'm going to show you how I do by adding in another parameter and then linking it together. So I'm going to use this as an example just because we have it right now. Let's do it with the body. I'm going to hide these for now. Okay, we're going to add a new parameter and then say you wanted more movement. We're going to add another new parameter and then add 3. And then what you can actually do is over here, it will link it together. So what I like to do is I go to each and whatever movement. So say I want it to have a lot of movement to it where it kind of has a snake-like movement. You'll adjust the parameters based off of that. So I have one here, and then I go through basically aligning it based off of where it is from there. So it's the center from the center to the right corner, and then again over here, and so on and so forth. So basically when you're doing that, it's going to allow you to move it based off of each area that you have it in. So you can see when I make the adjustments to each parameter keyform, it just allows more movement. But if I wanted to actually fade out, you can actually go to the keyforms, and over here in Inspector, you can select opacity and turn down the opacity. So if I want a bubble to go up and then it slowly start to go away, I can add that opacity. But you can see here, I would need to do it on all the keyforms. So you would just need to make sure it's directly on the keyform. If you're here and you see that the opacity is grayed out, it's because you aren't directly on the keyform. I typically have an issue with the middle item to like get it directly on there. But whenever I do that, if I just try to move this, it's going to automatically move it to where that keyform is, and then you can make an adjustment to it. But if it is grayed out, it's just not directly on the keyform yet. Something to be aware of with turning down the opacity if you're creating a GIF is that transparency kind of will add, I would say, some type of pixelation. It can ruin the quality when adding transparency to it. I have not found a solution to it. I've tried to export as an MP4, then changing it to a GIF afterward to make sure the transparency doesn't mess it up. But unfortunately, even that, it still adds like a grainy transparency to it that looks really bad. So that's why if I have something that is bigger, that is transparent, then I typically have it as a separate layer that can be added afterwards. For example, my hype jars, where I have a clear transparency that things will go through. But if it's something small, it doesn't really pose an issue by adding the opacity to make that change to it. So adding in an additional parameter can be really helpful even if you're adding tears or wanting something to go away and then come back, and then you can also make the adjustment to the opacity. I can show you another example of how I use that as well. Okay, so we have the firefly here. Oh, and a little tip, I mean, this is for most programs, you can do this, but if somebody doesn't know, I still want to share it. But you can drag the image by selecting the scrolly wheel, and it will allow you to drag what you're working on. So this is a really good example for how I use the parameters to kind of fade in and out. You can see the movement that I have it going through. They follow a specific path that it disappears and then comes back to how I want it to. So I did that by using that same method of adding different parameters and opacity. Again, I'm just providing you different tools, getting used to Live2D without being overwhelmed by it, and just having fundamental tools to learn from and create small projects to work your way up to something larger. Now that our model's done, we're going to create an animation. So we're going to go to the top, go to animation, and then you'll see the options over here, and you're going to select the film, and then you'll go to video. Okay, change the sizing, make sure fixed aspect ratio is not selected or it's going to keep on adjusting it. So we have the image, and you want to save it. So go to file, save as, save your model. Okay, so then you can see the model saved here. Then we're going to create the animation. So we have a blank canvas here. So we're going to go to where our model is saved, and you'll see it saved like this, and then you're just going to drag and drop it here. So then you'll see it on the screen. You can actually make adjustments to the sides and everything just by dragging it. If you want it to remain its size, you can hold shift, which is the same with other programs, so that is very useful. But just note that if you are making any adjustments to the size, it is going to add a keyframe just like with other animation programs. So if I make adjustments here, it's going to get larger and bigger, but that's not what I want. So if you're wanting it to be the size of the canvas, just make the adjustment at the front before you make any adjustments to it. So if you're making something like an emote, you want to have a smaller workstation and a smaller amount of frames that are going to be added in it, just because Twitch only allows you to have a certain file size for that. The larger your workspace is, the larger the file is going to be. So if you are making something that you plan on using on Twitch, then you want to try to have it as small as possible, especially because a lot of the compression websites require it to be below a certain amount. So you just want to make sure it's as small as possible. So I try keeping my workspace really small, especially if it's an emote. So if you're finding that you're trying to compress it on a website and it's not allowing you to, I would recommend trying to go to your work area and have less frames in that and try to see where you can manipulate it to be smaller. Okay, so dragging this orange area is going to be your workspace, and the gray area is the duration of whatever you're creating. And then the purple is what's going to be the image itself. So all of the jigsaw that we have right here. So you can see here it goes away, but the workspace is still there. For the most part, I don't ever need the work area or the duration of it to be different. So you don't necessarily need to play around with that. I just always keep it the same. So you can see here, like most programs that you work with, any adjustment that you make on here, it's going to automatically add a keyframe. So if I want it to move side to side, I add one here. I'm going to add one in the middle that goes to the side. And then I'm going to just copy this one that I have so it meets back up, just so that it has a nice loop, which I actually learned from watching Catliente's tutorial, that it is better to make sure that it starts and ends at the same spot. So you can see here, it's really simple to do, but as I said before, we have a transparent image here that we don't want when we export, or else it's going to add a really weird effect and it's going to look really grainy. And we also need things to pass through it since it is a hype jar, so we need it to be separated. So again, what's so cool about Live2D, which I absolutely love, is we can actually go back to the model and make adjustments to the model, and then you're going to see it in the animation. So if I now hide this layer of the jar, we're going to see that shown in the animation, which you guys can see I think is so cool, because then you can make adjustments to it. Say you want to add in more things to it, you can add more things into the model and then make an adjustment based off of that. So it makes it really nice that if you messed up somewhere or you need to redraw one area, you can do that. Sometimes you do have to add more animation to it, but it allows for you to not have to scrap everything and you can still work with what you have. Okay, so this is such a cool example of how you can do that. So I have this ramen bottle that a lot of people on TikTok were asking for other color options than pink, but I didn't want to have to do the whole process of reanimating everything and getting everything right to look exactly the same. So what I actually did was I went back into the model and did new colors in Procreate, and then I just copied them into that same model, and then I would go into my animation and see those changes made and then just export the animation itself. So you can see I went through and I made a bunch of different options, and so I easily made different colors without having to reanimate everything. So I can show you all how to do that. You would import it as a PSD file. So for instance, we have this PSD file and then we want to just drag the PSD file to it, and then whatever I want, I just copy and paste it into the specific model that you want it in. This can be really helpful as well if you notice something that you need to be corrected or you don't like something that you did within the illustration itself. You can go back into the model and change out anything. Sometimes you may need to reanimate that, but you don't have to reanimate everything. So that is so helpful. Now that you have your animation how you'd like it, exporting. Before you export, make sure to save it. So file, save as. So when you save that animation, if you want to make adjustments to it later, you actually have it there so you don't have to do extra work. You can see it has the model over here and then the animation to the side. It does save it as two separate things. Now that you have the animation exactly how you want it, you'll go to File, Export Image, GIF Animation. Make sure the settings are all done. High quality, loop, make background transparent, really important. That's all. Okay. So now that we have it exported, you can see it is saved like that. One last thing I want to show you is, say you're exporting with every emote, I like providing both a static image and a GIF. So the way to export as a static image, you'll go to File, Export Image as a still image, and make sure you already have it on the keyframe that you want it to be exported as. You'll have sequential number output settings. So that basically means it's set to that specific frame. I'll just save that as a PNG, save, and then it will save that as just a still image. So then you can go through to whatever resizer website that you use. If you don't have one, I can do a tutorial on how I resize my emotes, but you would go to your resizer and then you would have both a GIF image and a static image that you can provide for your clients. If you were using this for Etsy or to sell on Ko-fi, it's really helpful to have both a GIF image and a static image for your option and to know how to export it, which that is how. Okay, so that is my tutorial on Live2D. I hope it was helpful. Again, it's an introduction for beginners because I know the information on Live2D can be everything can feel really advanced and confusing and overwhelming. And so I just wanted to provide tools for you to be able to get started in learning Live2D because it is such an amazing software. I'm still in the process of learning it and I'm going to be tracking and documenting my process. So hopefully we can learn together. Again, if you have any tips, please let me know below. And I would love for you to tag me if you use my tutorials. I would love to see what you're able to create with this. I feel like this is a good stepping stone to allow you the courage to start learning Live2D. And I hope this could help someone. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope you have a good day. Bye.